FAR was all about future and about present and hope. And it was so different than what I understood about being Armenian. I've never felt emotional about a job. This was emotional. It was just something I felt very connected to instantly.
Welcome back to Rerouted, where we give you the tools you need to create the life you want. On today's episode, I interview Bree Carriglio. Bree is the Executive Director of Development and Institutional Marketing at the Fund for Armenian Relief, or FAR, where she leads strategic development initiatives, institutional partnerships, and communications to advance FAR's mission of supporting vulnerable communities in Armenia. With over 20 years' experience in nonprofit development, marketing, and brand strategy, Bree has been instrumental in driving impactful fundraising efforts, particularly in humanitarian aid, healthcare, and education programs. Prior to her role at FAR, Bree held key leadership positions at Bond, New York, where she spent nearly 14 years overseeing marketing strategy, brand development, and relocation services for one of New York's largest independent real estate firms. Her expertise in crafting compelling messaging and donor engagement strategies has been featured in publications such as Forbes, where she writes about fundraising, philanthropy, and nonprofit communications. Bree holds a degree in English language and literature from Barnard College and remains dedicated to leveraging storytelling and strategic partnerships to drive meaningful change. Let's get into the episode. Bree, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, I want to start off. Can you tell me a bit about the Fund for Armenian Relief and what your role in the organization is?
Sure. So I'm the Executive Director, U.S. Operations. Fund for Armenian Relief is an organization that takes a holistic approach to helping the most vulnerable populations in Armenia. We do economic development, we do social services, we do child protection, healthcare, education. And what that means is we have all different programs, and we're really programmatic. So we're focused on long-term sustainability, development, helping people become independent, helping people thrive, make sure that they're safe and protected and have the resources they need to live sustainable lives in Armenia.
All right. Heck yeah. Now I want to blast us all the way back. Can you tell me a bit about what your experience in college was like?
Wow, college. What do I remember? I didn't really have a very clear path when I set out to go to college. So I changed my major a couple of times. I started poli-sci. I thought I was going to law school. I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. That was what I had in mind. That changed quickly, and I ended up an English lit major. But it was, when I think back now, as an adult, I wish that I actually used a lot more of the resources that are in universities. I don't think I was mature enough or had a good enough sense. And I think when I talk to young people today that are in college, I'm amazed just at how much savvier they are at these types of things and really understand how to set themselves up. But I don't think I was as good as you can be in really connecting with professors, connecting in the resources that these universities have. I was at University of Michigan first, which is an incredible university, tremendous resources. And then I transferred to Barnard, also had tremendous resources. I don't think I used them as well as I could. But I loved learning, and I think I was really open to what was out there. I definitely didn't pigeonhole myself, I guess.
Okay, nice. So tell me about your first job out of college.
My first official job, I worked in publishing. So I was an assistant editor at Riverhead Books. That was my first job. Got it out of the New York Times back when you would have printed ads. And you would mail your resume. Those were things you did. So yeah, my first job was an assistant editor. My passion is writing. Creative writing. Riverhead was publishing novels, and they were really focused on first-time authors. So it seemed like a really special thing to be part of.
I remember when we spoke before, you mentioned that it didn't kind of live up to your expectations of what the role might entail. Would you mind talking a bit about that?
Sure. So I think for me, again, I think this speaks to not really having maybe the best sense of it, but I went into it with a very almost romantic notion of what it meant just to grow up loving books and not knowing anything about the business. I knew eventually I wanted to write, but I wasn't ready. I didn't feel like at 20 whatever years old I had anything to say at the time, personally. So I thought I was going and it was just going to be finding writers and nurturing them and, bringing that to fruition and discovering that it really was a business and a business like any other business. This is the product, this is the market, this is how it sells. This is the color of the cover that tests really well with an audience. So a book that matches that type of cover. It was, it was a bit disappointing, I think, in that sense, that just as a very young person with a passion, sometimes, what do they say? Don't meet your heroes. I think in that idea of you discover that something you love actually has a completely different side to it. That is not the ideal version of what you've created in your head.
I think that that's a very common or a very relatable experience. I've heard from a lot of people who've had similar experiences with having like a very glamorous idea of what something might look like. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with the reality of a job being way different than your expectations?
Okay. Yeah. And I think for me, and again, all of this is wisdom from years and years learned and years later. But you can either, I would say within it, understand that that's a possibility and maybe reframe it, where is there something in it that you can still really appreciate it? Very practical things like weighing the pros and cons. What is your ultimate goal within that job? So maybe that initial setup is disappointing, but is there something eventually that won't be? We learn so much and we train so much professionally, but I think there's so much psychology that goes into being in the workforce, pursuing your dreams professionally. Can you sort of manage the emotional, or develop the emotional intelligence to have the foresight to understand how you can navigate it? And if you can't, then reconsider. That's a possibility too.
That's really interesting. I've never heard about that or thought about that way, of the having emotional intelligence in addition to the professionality. That's very interesting way to bring that. Thank you very much for that insight. Now I want to keep talking a bit about your career path. Can you tell me about your entry into and then some of your first roles in marketing?
Sure. So I left publishing without a plan. It was very much that perhaps lack of emotional intelligence at the time, and walked away from that. And then I started doing the marketing as a side thing. So I went into real estate, actually. I financially needed something that would provide enough income to live in New York City in my 20s. And so I started doing that. And then the marketing was just an outgrowth of it. And it started slowly, and then ultimately started getting clients, and actually ended up doing it freelance for a long time. It was really just learning as I went, sort of paying attention to trends, seeing what worked, having the creative instincts, and kept going from there. And then one of my clients ultimately hired me full-time to build their marketing. They didn't have a marketing department at the time. They wanted to bring it in-house. They had outside consultants like me. So that was just an opportunity to turn it into something where I was always part of a team, to then lead a team and build one from the start, which was really cool.
That's neat. I'm kind of curious, do you think that your experience being a freelancer has helped you at all as you've developed further into your career?
It had me developed a healthy fear of freelancing. No, I think no, I think, what was really interesting is I got to work with a lot of different clients, which was really interesting because you work with a lot of different personalities and a lot of different voices. Where you're in a company, you tend to sort of have this one, or you should have this one unified vision, right? You're moving in this one direction. That taught me to be super agile and flexible when it came to the way people thought. And it would potentially mean new teams for every client, because let's say they'd bring their own creative, or you would have different people you would be reporting to. So I think in that respect, it really taught me how to work with a lot of different personalities very quickly.
It's interesting that you said healthy fear of freelancing. I think that people my age tend to there's a lot of enthusiasm for freelancing and like a lot of like glamorization of like being your own boss and stuff like that. So it's interesting when you say healthy fear. Is it something that since you've done it now you're a little bit more I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So I will say, so two things. One, my timing, I got out of it right at the recession. So it was what, 2010, 2009, 2010. It got very challenging because companies who would potentially budget for outside work, contract work, were cutting those types of things when they were trying to save because they tend to be expensive, right? So if you look at businesses when they're trying to figure out how do we ride through these economic downturns, freelancers, can be challenging. Having said that, I think over the years, things have changed dramatically. So when I was freelancing back in, up until 2010, it was a very different market. Now some of the biggest companies have consultants. They have contract work. They have service work. And it's more consistent in the sense that you see these longer term contracts, let's say 6 months, a year, and they're up for renewal, but they're almost a guarantee because they've become cost saving for companies now to actually have the consultants without inheriting, let's say, insurance costs, some of these other things. So now I think it actually could be more stable work. As far as being your own boss, I think that is another one that can be glamorized, romanticized, but it's a lot of work. Being your own boss means you're also the boss. So you have to be both all the time. And you have to always sort of be, one step ahead of what you need and then also doing what you need to do. So I think it can have its advantages and disadvantages. I know things like vacation time, like turning off basically, can be a lot more challenging. Because if a project comes up and you're supposed to go away, but you need the income, you just need to kind of think through those types of things.
Well, thank you for the insight. I want to now I brought us down the freelance path. I want to get us back on the philanthropy path. I want to know what led you to get into philanthropy and with FA and with FAR.
So I think it's something that's always been on my radar. My mom was a huge inspiration for me, and it was something that she was always very active in. So I had been with the company that I was with before FAR for 13 years. I had built a team from the ground up, which was an incredible experience. And I think I was at that point in my life where you've been working for a really long time, and you've done something and you start questioning, you sort of pick your head up. I think when you're building like that, you're not looking around. At least for me, I wasn't. And I got to a point where I was sort of thinking about how I want to contribute every day. How do I want to work? And even more than, well, what are you doing or where are you doing it? But how do you want to be working? And it became this thought of just wanting to do mission-driven work. I just really wanted that. I wanted to know all my energy was going into something that was mission-driven. And so I started kind of poking around. I started talking to people. I was very fortunate to have an incredible mentor who was one of the only people when I first started talking about it, people were like, you can't, you're too old, you've been in one industry for too long, you can't just switch industries, that's not how it works. And she was like, oh no, we could do this, and she just started asking me questions to really drill down what I was after. What did I really want? When you say you want to go into philanthropy or you want to work, do you want to work for a corporation that is doing corporate social responsibility? Do you want to work on the foundation side? They're really asking me questions, educating me, but asking me really important questions. Mm-hmm. And so went through that and kind of narrowed it down, and then just started looking.
How'd you come across FAR?
So I actually found them through LinkedIn search. I was researching different organizations, and I'm half Armenian, so on my mother's side. It's something that I did not grow up in the Armenian community. My mom, it was almost like an overcorrection. I'd like to say that, my mom's first language was Armenian. She was very much in the community. I think she sort of rebelled at 18. So as a result, we had certain things that we knew, but we weren't in the community. And I think after she passed away, it became something that I was more and more curious about. and really wanted to reconnect to or connect to. So when I found FAR, I was kind of amazed. Everything I knew about being Armenian was almost past. So it was genocide, it was loss, it was family members gone, it was just a lot of really hard things and a lot of things that felt very much past, gone. Those were sort of the themes. And FAR was all about future and about present and hope. And it was so different than what I understood about being Armenian. It was almost like a light switch. It was just incredible and very emotional. Like I've never felt emotional about a job. This was emotional. It was just something I felt very connected to instantly.
That's wonderful. I want to ask as well. You mentioned you had a mentor that really helped you figure out what exactly you want to do with philanthropy and kind of ask you those challenging questions. What role have mentors played in your career decisions?
I would say she was the first that I could really call one. I would say to anyone, it's an incredible thing to have. And I think as an older person, it's something I've learned to really take advantage of. There are so many people out there who are wise and have experience, and just listening to them and letting them guide you. I think a lot of the decisions I made up until then were not mentors so much as someone saying, oh, you should do this. And because I didn't know, I'd say, okay, and kind of, go in that direction. Where with her, it was really much more of someone really being able to nurture you and taking the time. And I would say for anyone, listen to the people out there. And if you can find someone that can guide you, take advantage of that and soak up every piece of it, because it's really helpful. It doesn't mean you have to take everything that they say, but it's really helpful to have sort of guidance, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well because a lot of people talk about having mentors when you're younger and when you're just starting off to kind of figure out what you want to do. But I don't feel like I hear about it as much when you're mid-career and you're looking to make a strong change. So I think I think it's great, especially just to find that person that will help you out a lot and that there are still people who know a lot more. I know that I've seen some people who are struggling a lot to make that pivot, but they don't necessarily have the people. And I'm not sure if it's just maybe they don't know that there are the people. I don't know what it is. But
I think that could be true. Yeah, I think that could be true. And it's funny, I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, that it's amazing how many people are happy to help people. You forget, and it doesn't have to be that you're we were talking about networking and the distinction between networking where it's just an ask. You're trying to find the person that can get to the person that can get you that job. And that is networking, but networking also in a way where you're just building out knowledge. So there are a lot of people out there in that capacity that are happy to just share, and offer advice or answer questions or ask you questions.
Do you find yourself now, as you've been somebody who's directly been benefited in like a really tangible way, in a meaningful way, that now you're more likely to help others out and be that mentor for them as well?
Absolutely. Okay. I think it's a great thing. I think you should pay it forward. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I want to know now, what was the transition from director of development, leading the marketing at FAR, to executive director? I'm also wondering as well, are there skills or perspectives that you got from marketing that have helped you lead the org now too? I know it's a big question, so sorry about that.
Yeah. No, so it was a lot. It was a transition to a completely new industry. So already a learning curve, right? Because it's just a different, marketing, I think, as a skill is transferable, but it's a different type of industry. It works differently. Pacing's different, all sorts of things. So there was already that learning curve and kind of getting in there. And then this came about, and my predecessor was retiring. And so this happened, and that was an even bigger learning curve, right? And there were so many things to contend with on top of, sort of building out this building out their marketing and development, but then also taking over on the US side, building out those relationships, and then also the cultural differences is another one. Most of our operations are in Armenia, so you have to be sensitive to everything that's happening. I think as far as marketing skills and how that transfers, I'm thinking, I mean, a lot of what marketing comes down to is educating people and knowing your audience, right? So I think when it comes to internally in an organization, educating people and knowing your audience can be useful no matter what you're doing. And I think a lot of it comes from that. I mean, so much of marketing is psychology, and so much of it is about connecting. So I think that that's pretty universal when it comes to running an organization, being in an organization, entering an organization. I think all of that applies.
Okay. I'm very curious. So I'm also half Armenian, and it's something where I also grew up outside of the Armenian community. And I'm wondering, you mentioned learning the cultural differences and working with that. How was that for you as you're working with Armenians in Armenia, growing up outside of it? Was that a big learning curve, or was it something, how'd that come for you?
It was a big learning curve. It was definitely, and I think even more so, and it's interesting, this idea is you also only being half Armenian, which it comes with its own set of prejudices, if you will, because you're not even full Armenian, so there's a whole other thing going on with that. I think it was really just a lot of listening and, a lot of not going in there and saying, oh, this is how it is, or this is how it's going to be, or this is what I'm going to do, but really having to understand how things work, how people operate. I think I'm a little bit, even with my team here, you can be maybe not so structured, where I think their things are a lot more structured, and that has to be respected. It was definitely challenging, but I think the best path was to just listen and observe and see how things worked, and then sort of when you're ready, approach it within the respect of that sphere.
I'm curious as well. With your mother being Armenian, you don't have the Armenian last name, so it's something. Do you mention it when you're talking with new people? Do you bring it up, or is it something that, because I have the long last name, so I people see it. But,
yes,
I'm curious.
It's funny that you said that. It comes up a lot,
Okay.
especially because my last name is so blatantly Italian. It is something I do have to mention. Sometimes people say, "Oh, you look Armenian," so right away it's like but yeah. No, I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago that we'd been working closely together, and she's like, "Oh, I had no idea," because I didn't mention it. I just assumed she would know because I was that far, that I was half Armenian or something related to being Armenian. But yeah, generally I do have to mention it.
Are most people who work at FAR Armenian in some capacity?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that also, as well, that connection cultivates a more mission-driven group? Do you think it's something where that propels people, or is that a big motivator for people to be involved and work for FAR?
I think so. I think so. We have had people that aren't. One of the people that works with me isn't as a consultant, but the majority of the people that work there are. And I think you kind of have to be connected in some way because it's hard. It's challenging work. It can wear you down a bit sometimes. I think in the face of things that happen, setbacks, you have to kind of feel something. I also think for the sake of the community, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but most of our donors are diaspora. So we really are within the Armenian community. So I think there's a certain level of trust and connection and being able to communicate something that's relatable. I think that matters for a lot of people.
That's interesting. I didn't even think about the donor base as well.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. We talked about how you had an idea of what your first job would look like, and it didn't necessarily align with expectations. I'm wondering, did you have any similar experiences once you got into philanthropy? Any misalignments of what you thought it might look like and what it actually looked like?
No, I had learned my lesson the first time. No, No, I no, I think that's a good question actually. So we're doing good. We have purpose. Um, but it is still work. It's still personalities. It's still, those types of things. So maybe in that respect, but I will say overall, and one thing I can say that was really important for anyone that is thinking about going into philanthropy is I did a lot of research on the organization and I trusted their work before I joined. So I knew that they were transparent. I knew that you could follow the dollars. So all of those pieces, I've heard horror stories about people going to nonprofits and it turning out to not be what it was supposed to be. So in that sense, I feel like I had an expectation of what the organization was, and it was. And so that part was, I had complete confidence in, and it wasn't changed in any way.
Is that something you'd recommend that people who are looking to get into philanthropy really focus on?
I think it's important. I think you should know. I think, especially in my position, if you want to be out there asking people to contribute to something, you want to be 100% sure that you're confident you know where the money's going and you know that the projects are being implemented and you can see those kinds of results. Yeah, I think it's important. Especially today. I mean, there's so many organizations and a lot are doing great work, but there are some, that it's questionable, unfortunately.
Do you feel like those types of organizations, do you think that the existence of those types of organizations that are a little bit more questionable make your work harder? Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
and there's there's Charity Navigator that rates independently. They rate you and they're looking at everything independently in your finances. So there are good checks, and there are good things in place, but I do think it makes it harder. And I think actually with younger people, they're a lot more diligent in a good way. If they're going to give to an organization, they want to know. And I think because they have seen certain organizations that have maybe set the tone. So yeah, I do think it makes it harder. You just have to communicate even more, and just make sure you're as transparent as you can possibly be.
Okay. I'm interested then as well. Do you think that's something where the marketing chops help you with that? Coming from that marketing background, do you think that's helped you in being more transparent and maybe helped you emphasize and recognize how important that transparency really is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I was saying it is that it's the education is giving. So when you give people information, you're not always just, and I'm a big believer in this, especially when it comes to marketing, you're not always asking, right? You're not just ask, ask, ask. You give them something that would make them feel comfortable, that then the natural next step would be potentially to give or to learn more or, to want to be involved in some way. So yeah, absolutely. I think education through marketing is key.
Do you think that there would be, and I don't mean to ask you to speculate here, because I'm coming from the marketing background feels very natural in that aspect. And I imagine if one came from like a sales background, that would look very different. Do you think it would? You have a lot more perspective on this than me, of course. That's why I'm asking you the question. That's why you're here. But
Yeah, it's interesting because I can't speak to like facts of people who I know who were in sales that went into philanthropy. So I think that I can't really say, but I definitely lean more towards the organization should speak for itself. So if I can communicate with you and share what we do, how we do it, who we do it for, and let you decide, if you want to participate. Just naturally, I'm more comfortable with that than, hey, I'm going to sell you on this idea, or I, yeah, I think that the work can speak for itself. So I think the communication can be education. I don't know what something overly sales-esque would be, but I think actually someone who's really good in sales hopefully believes in what they're selling and probably has figured out the things that are authentic to what it is that they're selling. I'm speculating, I don't know. I know, I think there is a distinction where someone's overly sales or like it's a different tone perhaps.
Okay, very nice. I wanna pivot a little bit, and I want to talk about what FAR's working on right now. Can you tell me about FAR's new ACT college and some of your other current work that's happening right now?
Sure. So ACT is our most exciting project, I'd say, this year. We opened in September. It is a tech-focused high school. So we say college there, but it's a high school translation here. So 14, starting 14 years old. It's a 3-year program. It is accredited by the Armenian government, so it has a traditional curriculum, but then it also has a tech focus. So the engineering, the deep engineering, computer science, digital art. Right now we have 80 students for our freshman class, so there'll be 80 to 100 every year. And I think for me, it's really exciting because first, all of the technology coming out of Armenia is exciting. It's something that's getting a lot of attention. I think it's super timely. I think it's giving an opportunity to young people, certainly in the regions that maybe would not have thought of this as a path. It's sort of changing the landscape for the way that they think and then for generations to come. So that is just really exciting. It's a beautiful brand new facility. It's operated through tech, so they have wristbands and there's no cash and, state of the art everything. They have an incredible engineering room that has the 3D printers and all of the pieces so they can be hands-on. So it's just really exciting. I think it's just a really exciting project, and one that FAR is very much interested in scaling throughout Armenia, which would be amazing. So I'd say that's probably our biggest one. We also recently, we have a small business assistance program. So we work with people, some who've been displaced from ARTSOC, some who have supplementary income, some who just have business ideas and need nurturing. And we have different ways of mentoring them to either train them with their business plans, make sure they're viable, and make sure they make sense for the region that they're in. In the case of this program, we train the women and they learn e-marketing and skills, and then there's a competition and they get seed money to actually launch their businesses. So we recently launched an online store that will bring these entrepreneurs to the U.S. market and be able to sell their products. And that's really cool for us because it's sort of taking that next step in sustainability. And I mentioned earlier, everything or most of what we would do is really driven towards that self-sustainable mentality. So giving people the resources and the skills, and it's different than the idea of humanitarian aid, which is really important too, and it's where we started, where it's more of here's the money, or here's the hygiene kits, or here's the blankets, whatever it may be, where a lot of what we've come to in this journey is giving people resources that will help them thrive and be able to be self-sufficient.
That's incredible. You mentioned that was where you started, was the humanitarian aid. What does the timeline look like for FAR in that transition?
1988. So there was a devastating earthquake in Gyumri, and horrible, horrible situation. And there were people here in the U.S. who got together and were just going over there with everything that was needed, and that was all crisis. So that's humanitarian aid, food, blankets, mattresses. I mean, you name it, they needed it. It was just mass devastation, and the way it happened, or the way it grew from that, was sort of being there and saying, okay, we've provided this help, but there's so much more to do here. And so slowly but surely it was looking at these different areas, whether it's education, economic development, how can we contribute in ways that will help people to grow? And it's really when they started getting into the more programmatic space, and looking at sort of long-term development, long-term solutions for people to really make sure that they can thrive.
I believe in that a lot. The sustainable solutions. I think that's great. I really think that's exceptional. I want to bounce back a little bit to something you said very, very early on, talking about creative writing, and you got into publishing because at 20 you didn't think that you had much to say. I'm wondering, do you think now that you've progressed a bit in your career, do you think you'll ever write a book?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something I've been working on. So getting there.
All right. How do you prioritize that? You're obviously very busy. You have a lot of weight on your shoulders. What's that balance look like?
So sort of using early mornings, late nights, and weekends. It's been a passion project. I've just gotten through the first pass, I'd say, of a novel that I've been working on. I have a writing group on, at night that once a week that we get together and workshop. That's been really consistent. So it's sort of having a passion that you have to commit to in a way that you use the free time that you have in a way that makes sense in between being a mom and a wife and all those other things. But yeah, I think it's something I really enjoy. So it's not like torture. I don't know what the equivalent would be, that if you had something, some people say I don't want to exercise, or I don't want, it's something I really love doing. So it's whenever I can steal hours, basically.
Okay. I don't mean to ask for any spoilers, but what is your novel about?
It's a bit dark. It's about the consequences of unresolved trauma. So it's about a character did not, who had coping mechanisms throughout their life to deal with trauma that begin to fail, and what can happen when you don't confront those.
Is that, if you don't mind me asking, does that come from anywhere in particular? Any inspiration from your life or from things that you've seen? Or from your
A
work
bit
so
of
far?
both.
Okay.
Yeah, not so much with FAR, but I feel like it's a universal theme. I think you reach a certain age, I think you can recognize certain patterns as a human that a lot of times can be related to stories you've told yourself, that a lot of times are established when you're younger. And I think that those are things that you might think are serving you for many years. You don't even know, it's unconscious. You build in these ways of coping that you think are serving you, or you don't think your sense of self is serving you. And I think that there is a point, not for everybody, but for I think a lot of people, where you realize maybe they're not. And what does that mean? And how do you deal with that?
I'm looking forward to for when that maybe releases at some point in the future. That sounds great. I'm really glad to hear that you have that for yourself as well. I wonder as well, does the work of FAR, does it ever hit a point where you talked a lot about it getting emotional at points? Does it hit a point where you hit a kind of like a critical mass?
It's interesting. My very war broke out, and I was in Armenia, and it was incredibly emotional, and it was devastating in a lot of ways. Was nothing I had known. Growing up in the States, working in careers that didn't even touch those types of topics, where over 100,000 people are crossing the border with absolutely nothing, with no way back. It makes me emotional talking about it. And then even understanding just the geographic significance of being landlocked, and these borders, and those types of things. It was certainly emotional. There was even just this understanding of being able to go back to the States versus not being able to go back to your home. That definitely weighed on me. I think, if anything, it solidified a sense of purpose. And I think sometimes, yeah, it's hard. But every time I go there, I say this with complete humility. It's the people I meet are 100 times stronger than I could ever know to be. Just people their resilience, it's just incredible. It's just incredible. You talk to them, and there's hardships that people have known. There are things that people have faced, and I mean, and they don't just keep going. They thrive. I mean, they thrive, and there's just this power to their existence, that I would say, if I ever do feel a little bit beaten down, I just, going there, going to our projects, meeting people, spending time with people, it's enough to get you moving again.
That's really wonderful. I was going to ask if working on your book and then being, like you said, a mother and a wife helps you with that. I feel like you kind of answered that indirectly. as well about that feels like the healthiest way to work through that is at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
It's just being motivated again by the work. And that's really incredible. That's really powerful, actually. Something that always saddens me as somebody who is part of the diaspora, but is of course not I'm not involved with FAR. You're way more involved. Is this something where the fact that when you were talking about in 2023 when 100,000 Armenians displaced from Artsakh wasn't in mainstream news, that wasn't something that a lot of Americans knew about and still don't know about happening just because it didn't hit the news cycle for us. Is that something that you struggle with? Is that something that you find difficult? Is that something that you have to work with indirectly as the head of an organization that works through helping people in these challenges?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you ever experienced this, but growing up, I would say I'm Armenian, and people would say Romanian, and you'd say no, Armenian. They say Iranian. You're like, okay, forget it, sure, and it happens to me now as an adult, even with people I know. Like it's one of those things where I think someone said to me, I didn't know Armenia still existed. So you're constantly talk about educating. You forget educating people on what we're doing. A lot of times, if you're outside of the diaspora, you have to educate people on what being Armenian, what that even means, or where Armenia is, and all of these types of things. And I do think, and this is something that has been really important to us. It was hard. And, look at the genocide is still not recognized, right, by a lot of people. And this fear because of the dynamics of it. We don't do politics ever. But I will say that fight to have a right to exist is very much ingrained in what it means to be Armenian. And I think that this idea to have a voice and, something like the coverage, there was very little covered in 2023. And then, of course, it was overshadowed, within a couple of weeks, the timing, just because the world is a horrible place and there's always horrible things happening, unfortunately. So one thing, we have someone who we work with who does our PR, and aside from promoting FAR, a really important thing for all of us was not just promoting FAR, but promoting Armenian story and trying to get mainstream media to not just recognize the sad stuff and the hard stuff. And yes, 2023 is something that should be talked about. And even the blockade, a 9-month blockade where people were starving. They couldn't get medical care. None of this. I mean, nobody was talking about this. And that was horrible. I mean, and horrifying. But for us, it's, aside from all of that, it's also sharing the great things that are coming out of Armenia. And, there is the tech developments and the Nvidia and all of these things. And trying to also get those stories. So we do a lot of work in media where it's trying to get mainstream media to just recognize Armenia in that way. It absolutely is a challenge, 100%. We did a story with NPR a year after the war in 2023. We did a year after of where refugees were now and sort of, what the displacement meant. And that was really amazing that they were interested in doing that. We've been able to do some more mainstream in the tech space, tech type of articles, because that is a constant thing for Armenia in the Caucasus. But overall, yeah, it's hard.
I really appreciate as well how you brought it back to what we were talking about earlier as well, about focusing on also all the amazing things that are happening within Armenia and all of the really positive things in the future as well. Because, as you were just saying, like the tragedy isn't over, unfortunately. It continues to go on. I really admire the work that you do because I think it's really meaningful. And I also very much relate to knowing the sad stuff and the tragic stuff. And I've talked to a lot of people about the sad and the tragic stuff, but I love looking forward. I think it's great.
I think it's a really important balance because, like you said, like that's how I grew up. Like my grandparents survived unspeakable things, and it was a really, really dark existence. I associated being an Armenian with just a dark existence. And that's why now I think it's really important to not forget those things. And one of the things I looked at when I was considering this was there were a lot of opportunities in genocide curriculum and making educating people, like getting genocide studies into universities, and they were really interesting to me. And I 100% appreciate the value, especially when you are literally contending with people who don't recognize the Armenian genocide as a thing. So I 100% would never say that's not important, but I think, for at least personally for me, I already grew up with that. I know what that meant, but there's a certain stuckness to that I didn't see being beneficial to the people in Armenia that we could help. And it was, and that's a personal thing. I still value it 100%. But I do think we have to do both.
Yeah. And I feel like there's an interesting thing as well where it's like outside looking in and being someone who's diaspora, having that very much on the back burner. But when you're working with people and for people who are very much in the here and now and are, I mean, they're living it, it feels like an important perspective shift of, it feels like you're able to help people way more effectively when you change the perspective to future focus, because that's what people have, is the future.
Yeah.
Doesn't help to dwell. So, okay. I want to ask a few quick questions before like a couple, like my rap. I have 3 like rapid fire air quotes questions for you. Okay. So my first question is, what is one experience that shaped what you wanted your career to look like?
Just in my career, I could say there was a time when I felt like I didn't have a voice, and I felt like if I was going to be contributing professionally to anything, I wanted to have a voice, and I wanted the people that worked with me to have a voice. So I would say that it shaped it, and I've held on to it pretty tightly as a basic philosophy.
All right. That's the way I've ever heard that question answered before. Okay, that's incredible. Next question is, what is one skill that is your secret weapon, and how would you cultivate it?
Ooh, this is going to sound obvious, but I think going back to that idea of listening, I think part of being able to have a voice is really understanding who you're talking to, and the only way to find that out is hearing what they have to say. Mm-hmm. So I think always when it comes down to it, if there's ever a real problem in the organization, anywhere, you can probably, get somewhere by listening.
I don't think that's basic at all, or the terminology that you use. I think that's really important. So that's great. My final question is, what is one piece of advice from a mentor that changed your perspective?
I won't use the words she said, but basically, don't be ridiculous. You can do that. It had a few other inappropriate words in there, but it was pretty that. It was that.
Okay. I love that. All right, Bree, it's been incredible talking with you today. Truly wonderful. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share or add?
Well, I think just for anyone that doesn't know about Armenia or doesn't know what's going on there, I recommend checking out our organization just because there's a lot to learn and discover. Armenian or not, there's a lot to see about what we're doing and the kind of work that is coming out of Armenia that I'm super proud of.
All right. Well, Bree, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any thoughts, feedback, guest recommendations, or just want to say hi, shoot me an email at nick@reroutedpod.com. If you like the show, leave a review, give us a follow, like, and subscribe. You can also find links to our website and socials in the description below. You can also find the link to FAR to find more information there. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.